Good evening. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the President's Lecture Series. I'm Cindy Powers, the Director of Continuing Education and Lifelong Learning. And tonight's lecture is part of the Year of Civility, a collaboration between Shepherd University and the Stubblefield Institute, focusing on civil discussion and action, bringing together diverse ideas and addressing complex issues. Tonight, we are thrilled to hear from Susan F. Hirsch. Susan Hirsch is the Vernon M. and Minnie I. Professor of Conflict Resolution and Anthropology in the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University in Virginia. She joined the faculty at George Mason after 14 years teaching at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. Both Susan's undergraduate degree from Yale University and her graduate degree from Duke University are in anthropology, and her area of specialization within cultural anthropology is known as legal anthropology. Susan is the author of numerous books and articles on such topics as Islamic law, courts in Kenya, gender and law, environmental justice, post-conflict justice, and pedagogy for the peace and conflict field. Fluent in Swahili, she has conducted ethnographic research in Kenya, Tanzania, Malta, and the United States on law and religious minorities, rule of law, and restorative justice. Her research has been funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, the National Science Foundation, the National Humanities Center, and the Department of Education. Susan has twice been awarded a Fulbright Fellowship, which afforded her incredible experiences teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and the University of Malta on the island of Malta, where she has taught short courses for a decade. As she will discuss this evening, experiential learning is a key element of her approach to teaching. Susan is currently on loan from George Mason University to the National Science Foundation, where she works as a program officer in the Law and Science program. For the past 5 years, Susan has served on the board of Restorative Arlington, a community-based nonprofit aimed at expanding restorative justice options in the courts, schools, and community in Arlington County, Virginia. Since 2007, Susan and her husband, Michael Sullivan, have split their time between the D.C. metro area and Shepherdstown, where they own a home in Steamboat Run and enjoy the many amenities, parades, theater, football games, downtown shops, and restaurants of our vibrant community. I hope you will join us after this lecture for a reception in the lobby. Please welcome Susan Hirsch.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you, President Hendricks. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. I'm really excited to be here and to speak with you tonight. It's really an honor to speak at Shepherd University, an institution that I have long admired and also benefited from as a neighbor. And I'm glad to see friends in the audience, and my husband, Michael Sullivan, who supports me in so many ways, including telling me I might not be loud enough right now. Thank you. That's great. Before I begin I need to offer a disclaimer. All of my comments this evening are my own and don't reflect either of my employers at this time. So I think you heard a bit of background about me. I'm an ethnographer. I'm always interested in how ordinary people think about and use law and how they think about the relationship between law and culture. And I moved from teaching cultural anthropology early in my career at Wesleyan University to the peace and conflict field at George Mason, and I'll call that field, sometimes I'll call it PAX tonight, the Peace and Conflict Studies field. And what I have appreciated most about the PACS field is that it offers, and I'll just say a little bit about it in case people aren't familiar, it offers social science tools to analyze conflict, and it focuses on the roots of intractable conflicts. Think about conflicts like in Northern Ireland or places in the Middle East, for instance, at the international level. And as well, the field is always looking to address those conflicts through conflict resolution, ideally conflict prevention, but also, sadly, post-conflict justice after significant conflict, and what we call peace building, or really working to build equitable, sustainable, peaceful societies. My school focuses on conflict at all levels, so from international all the way down to interpersonal conflict, and we also think a lot about the relationship between the conflict theories that we teach in class and actual practice and implementation. I've had the great opportunity to teach students at all levels of higher ed and of all ages. So tonight I'm going to share with you some of the lessons learned from teaching budding conflict resolvers and peace builders. My contention is that engaged learning is an invaluable educational tool for this task, especially in a time of significant conflict. And engaged learning, as I practice it, I think connects to the aim of this lecture series, expanding civility. Some of my remarks will come from my recent book, Teaching Peace and Conflict Studies, Engaged Learning, and Inclusive Theory, and I want to give a shout out to my co-author, Agnieszka Paczynska. We've worked a lot on projects relating to pedagogy, and she always calls this our COVID book because we wrote it together, but we're never together when we were writing it. So tonight, my agenda is to talk a little bit about the peace and conflict field a little bit more, and the importance of civility, empathy, and authenticity for accomplishing the aims of that field. I'll talk a little bit about how I arrived at engaged learning as a good way to address the challenge of teaching peace and conflict studies. And then, using some examples from courses that I've taught, I'll talk a bit about the lessons learned around engaged learning. And then my conclusion reflects on higher education today. So in today's world, we face very difficult conflicts. I think you'll agree with me. Hot wars in multiple places, growing economic inequality, climate change and natural hazards, social divisions, and fragile relationships, whether we're talking about the community of nations or the members of families. At the root are complex, long-standing conflicts, and the evidence is clear and mounting that our ability to communicate about most conflict is pretty abysmal. If people caught in conflict lack the ability to treat one another with civility, to feel empathy and show it, and to speak authentically, sharing experiences honestly in ways that inform others and open up space for vulnerability and for collaboration. If they can't do those things, then confronting destructive conflict is very, very difficult. How can we use education to make better progress toward effective discussion of our shared conflicts? When I mention the need for civility, empathy, and authenticity, I'm not talking about national leaders or politicians or diplomats. That would be great, but I'm not holding out hope right now, and it's not my project. The peace and conflict field, as I see it, is generally not focused on top-down solutions. Lasting solutions to complex problems need to involve a wide set of stakeholders, especially those who are most affected. So the field highlights bottom-up solutions. And to do so, it targets key members of civil society, such as teachers, religious leaders, community organizers, nonprofit directors, unions, grassroots. The hallmark is to involve members of civil society in resolving their own conflicts and taking action to build more peaceful societies. Coming from academic anthropology, I had to think a lot about what students would need to learn to engage in conflict resolution and peace building. They definitely need a lot of old-fashioned knowledge in the form of theories of conflict, analytic techniques, and research methods. But they also need tools to accomplish the goals of creating more peaceful societies. So conflict resolution and peace building tools, which I'll talk about a little bit tonight. They also need to know how to do project design and implementation, and they need to evaluate the work that they do, so evaluation research. Because students need to collaborate to devise and implement interventions if they want to go into this field, I came to focus more on skills and personal capabilities. If bottom-up solutions are the gold standard, then students need to learn to engage with a wide range of communities. This approach requires understanding things like and having qualities like civility and empathy and authenticity, as I've already mentioned. They also need humility, problem-solving ability, communication skills, cultural sensitivity, leadership, and teamwork. Students who care deeply about others and want to do good in the world often select peace and conflict studies and related fields as their profession. Yet everyone can benefit from exposure to a field that cultivates these skills. Arriving at engaged learning was a journey for me. I've always liked to lecture. I like to have nice slides and do a nice presentation. But the challenge of teaching budding practitioners forced me to rethink how I taught. And I came to admit that expecting students to learn these skills primarily from reading and listening to my lectures, however compelling those might be, that had its limits. Over a decade ago, I worked with a group of colleagues at George Mason and secured a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, and I'm sending positive thoughts to the department. That grant came from a program called FIPSE, the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education, and our project aim was to develop experiential learning for the conflict field, the peace and conflict field. On our minds was the need to make better links between the theory that students were learning in our classrooms and the practice that they hope to do as professionals in the field. So I want to assure everyone, all of you, the American taxpayer, that you got your money's worth from our FIPSE grant. We educated hundreds of students. We mounted projects on 4 continents. We trained postdocs, grad students, new teachers. We created educational materials and offered them out freely. We published a bunch of academic papers and a couple of books. And I just want to underline, this is what federal research grants do. And a lot of us don't do this for the money. We do it out of our curiosity and drive and a desire to see success in our students. So our project developed and tested experiential learning exercises that we would do in classrooms, and also what we called service learning intensives, and I'll talk about those in a little more detail. But backing up a little bit, what generally am I talking about when I talk about engaged learning? So it's a form of experiential learning, and there are a lot of types of experiential learning: simulations, role plays, now what's called serious games that are often played virtually. participatory or inquiry research, internships. All of these are forms of learning by doing or experience. And research shows that a really robust body of research shows that there can be some very positive outcomes to experiential learning, including students come to better understand and internalize the concepts, theories, contexts that they're studying. They can be able to see things from multiple perspectives in a more vivid way through experiential learning. Robust finding is that they're more likely to complete their degree when they engage in some elements of experiential learning during the course of their studies. And we've found through our own research that they are more ready for employment. And our own students reflect on this, and we've heard from employers as well. So here's some students participating in a simulation, a multi-day simulation that we do that focuses on the problem of a company wanting to do gas drilling in the Mediterranean and having to negotiate this. The approach that I want to talk about tonight, though, are what we called service learning intensives. And so this was a model that my project group came up with, but there are many, many schools, probably Shepherd, who have forms of intensive learning. So I'm just going to speak about my experience, but I want to just recognize that, you know, we don't have any special secret sauce and we didn't invent this, but we have some examples that we learned a lot from, and that's what I'm sharing with you tonight. So this is how we approached it. We created 1 to 6 week courses, some in the US, some abroad. Important part of how we approached it was that we partner with community-based organizations to address their needs. So we really wanted them to collaboratively with us come up with what would work for them. We focused for student learning on research and practice skills. And the learning that happened was formal, through reading things and that sort of approach, informal through doing and engaging, and through a lot of reflection. And we foregrounded ethical engagement in our courses. We didn't stay in fancy hotels. We tried to patronize local businesses and do things the way people in the communities we worked in were used to. So the overall aim of the service learning intensives was to challenge students to experience the sorts of logistical, conceptual, and ethical dilemmas faced by practitioners working in the peace and conflict field. The experience is real, but it's a practice run where they can mess up and we can fix things. And it's a little bit different than just doing this for the first time as a professional. And we worked with our partners to determine what they would want to accomplish with us. One student faculty team on the left worked in Liberia, West Africa, and our partner there, Don Bosco Homes, wanted support to mediate a longstanding land dispute, and we worked with them on that. In Charleston, West Virginia, our students used focus group methodology to determine patterns of conflict at a Job Corps facility. And then they designed and delivered a conflict resolution skills training. We've done courses in Colombia, in Malta, a variety of places in the US, and generally had pretty good results. But these courses are hard to pull off. That's why they are what's called high-touch educational experiences. They require significant planning, time, funding, and frankly, a temperament that can handle risk and uncertainty. And that's faculty, students, and administrators who sometimes get phone calls about the things that go awry. These are not just one-off spring break trips, but rather courses that are scaffolded into the curriculum. Ideally, students prepare for them, and there's follow-up afterwards. What we do with the experience afterwards, how we talk with the students about it over time, is as important as the activity itself. Our sense, confirmed by our research and that of others, is that these courses provide unparalleled opportunities for building students' capacity for civility, empathy, authenticity, and many other skills. In mounting these courses and that's my husband. I'm glad it was you. No one else has to be embarrassed. In mounting these courses and in studying them, we have a lot of lessons learned. So let me share a few of them. One is that when these courses are successful, they take students out of their comfort zone. So at some point in most of our engaged learning courses, students feel uncomfortable. They don't like the food. They're homesick. It's hard to understand people. There's too much new information. Just being in a place where there's conflict, not even violence, but tension and uncertainty, that creates discomfort. This can produce frustration, defensiveness, shutting down. It was not our aim for students to feel discomfort, but we also did not try to avoid it. We warned them that they might feel it, and when it happened, we leveraged those feelings as an element of learning. The truism for people who want to work in the peace and conflict field and related fields is that they need to manage their own discomfort and the discomfort of others. And this can mean recognizing their own sensitivities and developing methods of coping. So there's a lot of techniques, but our go-to approach was to emphasize that students rely on their team and on our local partners. We always put students into teams, and we turn them toward each other to share any difficult moments. The trips that we mounted outside the U.S. pushed students out of their comfort zone, but similar responses also emerged on our U.S. trips. And we write about a bunch of these in an edited volume called Conflict Zone, Comfort Zone. Let me tell you about service learning intensives that we mounted in Charleston, West Virginia. As I mentioned, part of the aim was to work in the local Job Corps. The other aim was to educate our students about the conflict over mountaintop mining in that region. On our trips to southern West Virginia, usually a week or two, students were taken out of their comfort zone. The lack of cell coverage in southern West Virginia was a huge issue. Even the windy roads challenged students and faculty with car sickness. People were very upset by the tension that they encountered in relation to mining, especially because they were encouraged to try to understand all sides of the issue that they were seeing. They were put out of their comfort zone, but not always in ways that we as instructors could have anticipated. Let me give you an example. Some of you may, over the years, have met Larry Gibson. Larry, until his death a few years back, was an active anti-mountaintop mining activist. A former underground miner, he was appalled at a surface mining operation adjacent to his family's property. Our visit with Larry was eye-opening for the students. Meeting a person at the site of ongoing conflict and hearing their perspective was priceless. Larry explained the impact of the mine on his life. He showed us bullet holes in his trailer that were meant to silence his activism. The students felt empathy to a tremendous degree. As often happens in these situations, the students expressed to Larry their desire to do something about the issue. And he encouraged them to learn more about it and to figure out actions that they could take once they really understood the issues. But then he suggested something else that they could do. We followed him to the entrance of his property, and he pointed to a pickup truck with rakes, hose, trash bags, and some gardening gloves. And he said, "You can clean up around here. There's a lot of brush." And the students looked really surprised. A couple of them mouthed to me and to each other, like, "Do we have to do this?" And I was just kind of non-committal, allowing them to sort it out. And this is the kind of moment I love in this kind of course, because they had to decide, do manual labor on a hot day or disappoint Larry, who they had really come to respect. And it led to really interesting discussions afterwards. Thankfully, Larry didn't make them work for very long at all, but I appreciated the learning experience that it provided for all of us. Now, I'll admit that causing students discomfort cuts against increasing demands from students that we as instructors should protect them. I'm sure you've heard about trigger warnings when students request to have notice that a harmful experience might be coming. And I've had requests for trigger warnings for things like gunfire that might occur in a film, or language describing slavery, or even profanity. There was a terrific play about this topic at CATF a few years back. It is not an easy issue, and as instructors, we've struggled over protecting students versus exposing them to discomfort in ways that might build their skills. And we handle the tensions and the awkwardness of all this by really debriefing afterwards. And this is like a key element of our approach to teaching. More talk, not less, is usually the best approach, especially in those situations of tension. For anybody who wants more information, before I move on to my next topic about mountaintop mining, with a colleague, I wrote a book about the topic from the perspective of conflict resolution, and again, an example of what the peace and conflict field does. The picture is a consensus building meeting in southwestern Virginia that helped to create a group that has been cleaning up the Clinch River. All right. A second thing that successful engaged learning should do. It should cause participants to think before they speak. A lot of conflict takes place through language. Just focusing on key forms of hate speech, we've all heard insults, dehumanizing speech, when you talk about people as if they weren't human, and de-individuating speech, where you just lump people into a category and refuse to recognize them as individuals. These can make people feel violated and demeaned. They're very concerning. And relatedly, big red flags for the conflict field are situations where hateful speech also conveys a willingness to do violence. Assaultive forms of speech often express a really strong us-them division that can be very hard and to break down and very threatening. So the conflict field really thinks a lot about these kinds of speech and what kinds of approach we might take to avoid them or to kind of reframe them so that people can talk with each other in different ways. A lot of approaches, what I might call conflict resolution and peace-building tools, are based in language. They are linguistic interactions like peer mediation, setting up community dialogue, guided roundtable discussions. I mentioned consensus building. And I'll talk a bit more about the last one, circle process, in just a moment. So all of these forms of interaction are aimed at avoiding shouting matches and people just, pitted in that against each other in that us-them way without communicating. Each of these approaches has ground rules that deviate from ordinary conversation. It's not always easy to learn a new way of speaking or to convince others that it's valuable. And the peace and conflict field teaches about these approaches, and it offers opportunities for students to gain experience. And let me talk about just one of these, circle process. So I had a lot of interest in training students in circle process. And that was part of my aim when I got involved in January 2020 in what turned out to be a multi-years long engagement with a diverse group of community members in Arlington, Virginia. They were building a restorative justice program from the ground up. And it's now a thriving community-based nonprofit. They deliver restorative justice services, mostly at the request of courts that send harm cases to them for to be handled so that they aren't handled in court. We've ended up specializing in bar fights. Turns out there's a lot of bar fights in Arlington, Virginia. And boy, it saves people who are often very embarrassed the next day from a really serious charge and a really life-changing experience. These cases are handled through circle process. And I was really very glad over the last few years to be able to see a collaboration and foster a collaboration between Restorative Arlington and George Mason University. We collaborated on training, on awareness raising about restorative justice as an issue. We evaluated their programs, and our students had some internships. And I could have talked all night about restorative justice tonight, but if anybody's interested, please reach out because it's something I'm very passionate about. But let me talk about circle process, and because it can be used in a lot of different ways. I mean, literally, whether it's a harm case or it's a group coming together to talk about a hard topic, the format is pretty much the same. You sit in a circle. Sometimes you use a talking piece. Each person talks one after the other. And the ground rules really encourage speaking from personal experience and expressing one's own perspective rather than reacting to, questioning, or criticizing the others in the group. And it sounds simple, but it can be very deep in terms of the conversation that comes out. In the circle setting, people open up, they think really hard before they speak, and they really listen to one another. There's a sense of equality of voices, and people speak with an authenticity and vulnerability that surprises them. There's a circle keeper always in a circle, and you can see he's the guy has like some paper in front of him. He's probably just making small notes. Circle processes have their roots in practices of indigenous people in Australia, Africa, and North America. And as I mentioned, they can be used to do a lot of different kinds of interactions. Because there are rules, people can't just blurt out whatever they want to say. And one downside is that stringent rules for speaking can feel awkward and constraining. And yet the oddness of circle processes can have profound effects on how people hear one another and what they learn about themselves as they monitor and regulate their own speech and their own reactions. So as Restorative Arlington got started, our students had many engaged learning opportunities. And the centerpiece of what we did in our partnership was training in how to run circles. So we gave a lot of different people training so that they could do this in their own communities. We would bring together our own undergraduate and graduate students, public school teachers who wanted to use circles in their classrooms, county officials who were concerned about issues of racial violence and wanted to mount circles, and community members who were just interested in maybe having circles at their church or in some other community setting. Part of every training included a circle discussion, and this was a highlight, or the evaluations we did of this project afterwards showed that all the participants really liked this part. Older community members really enjoyed hearing students' perspectives, and students felt the same. Sometimes our students were surprised. For one, they were surprised that adults participated in a nighttime training, sometimes after work, when they didn't have to. It made an impression on them that adults cared so much about their community that they sought out this training and would take the time to do so. So I don't have any lovely pictures of those encounters. Restorative processes are usually confidential and private, and most of the ones we offered were actually held online using Zoom during COVID. And it's not optimum, but I bring that up because it is possible to do these kinds of activities even virtually. In one graduate class that I taught post-COVID, the main assignment was for students to plan and deliver a face-to-face community circle activity, and they hosted community members under the theme, A Sense of Peace and Belonging in Arlington County at our campus. And it went really well. That activity convinced me, again, of the great value of connecting students to the diverse communities around them, and particularly involving older adults. Third, successful engaged learning should encourage participants to reflect critically. Our model informs a course that ran in Malta for 5 years. Sorry to switch the US, and now we're out in the Mediterranean in a small island nation. Malta is south of Sicily, not far from the coast of North Africa. The population is a little over 500,000. And my husband Michael and I have spent time there every year for over a decade, and we can confirm that it's quite beautiful and a very, very interesting place. So the course that I ran there was called Bridging Differences, Migration in the Mediterranean. We would bring a faculty student group up to about 15 students and do an intensive week of project work with long-standing partners in Malta. The focus was migration and integration, and the learning focus was practice skills and evaluating projects. The students only stay a week, but they do a lot of preparation beforehand and follow up. And some of the activities that we engaged in were focus groups, conflict resolution skills workshops, we taught about mediation, and we facilitated group discussions. So migration is a huge issue in Malta. Over the last 2 decades, thousands of people have come to the island by boat. If you look at that small, very insecure boat in the top, a picture crammed full of people, these boats leave North Africa and head toward Europe. And some of them get rescued, which you see in the lower photo, and others don't make it. Those who are rescued have to be taken to the closest European Union port, which is usually in Italy or Malta. So through writing, films, directly meeting people, students hear a variety of perspectives about migration. So just to give you a sense, people would say, we're a small island nation. We can't have a lot of other people coming here. We don't have room. Why are we the place for the EU where people stay? People coming here really want to go to England or Germany, and how about they move on? People draw on their Catholic faith. One approach might be to protect it. You know, people from other religions are coming, and this is going to disrupt. Other people draw on that faith to say, we welcome the stranger, and they can come and we can incorporate them into our approach. A long history of migration by Maltese. There are more Maltese who live in Australia than in Malta. So people are very familiar with migration, and they understand, especially they understand once they hear the stories of people who come from conflict-ridden places or from the ravages of climate change. They have very compelling stories. The aging local population can sometimes feel unprotected from new people coming, but they have also benefited from the caregiving that immigrants to Malta have done. So you can see there's a lot going on. People who come to Malta are permitted to work. They don't necessarily have to live in the shadows, and so they're seen as contributing to the economy. There's a lot of languages in the schools now that there weren't before. So many issues on the table. And to make sense of all these views and to get at the deep roots of conflict, students have to think very critically about multiple perspectives, weighing them against each other, putting them into context, and doing more research to really try to understand it. And it's so important that when they hear from people themselves who are actually experiencing it. Within all this, we found our niche working with migrant-led organizations over the years. It took a while to get to this point, but these are usually people who have been in Malta for a while and want to improve their ability to resolve conflicts internal to their group as migrants and also external with Maltese society. So they wanted skills training in peace and conflict resolution. And here we are running a conflict skills workshop with a group called Libico, which is an organization of Libyan migrants to Malta. And this was a really fun experience because we planned for 35 people and like 60 showed up, and our students had to be really resourceful to accommodate that much interest. And it's a good reminder these activities are logistically sometimes really challenging. But the workshop was a success, so much so that the next year, this organization asked us to help them with strategic planning. And the students organized that, and we did it in 2 days. And the first day, looking at different sectors like education and work, they had a small group, actually they were kind of large group discussions where they plotted out what are the issues, what do we care about. And so just wanted to see in terms of education, some of the issues that concern them, security, things like bullying and racism. They wanted to think about how their young people could have better understanding of Maltese history and culture, but also how could they hold on to their Arabic language skills. So these are the kinds of things that people were wrestling with. And the second, and it was really interesting for the students because they resonated with a lot of these topics, particularly issues around concern over bullying and the other kinds of things that challenge young people in schools. The next day, we met with a smaller leadership group to put together the strategic plan. And again, just to show you kind of like the in-depth work that gets done, the group focused a lot on how to promote leadership, how to really steer the group, but also our students talked with them a lot about youth clubs, how to have young people get really productively involved in smaller organizations that could help build their leadership ability and empower them. The Libico group was really thrilled with all the progress that we made together, and I felt that the students had the opportunity to authentically engage in what peace builders actually do in their professional work. But some of the students were not happy. When we debriefed with them, they expressed frustration that during the discussions on the first day, participants from Libico started to speak with one another in Arabic. They got really excited about the topics. A bilingual participant tried to translate everything and take notes for the students, but not everything was translated, and everybody agreed that the key ideas were there, but the students felt they'd missed a lot, and it bothered them that they were left out. So we talked all that through and emphasized that they contributed to meeting the goals of the exercise. It was a good lesson that this kind of work doesn't always go the way that you think it will. It took a while in our conversation for students themselves to bring up the point that, gee, maybe this was the way some people in the Libico group felt when they were in Maltese culture and left out things because of language differences or cultural differences. So in the end, it was really an important point that allowed for empathy as well as a lot of critical reflection. To kind of build on that orientation after the course, the students were encouraged to apply what they had learned to the conflict over immigration, the conflict in Malta, to apply it to immigration in the US. And this was really powerful. And it came out in papers that they wrote. Just having the experience, however intense, is not really enough. It's important that engaged learning kind of complement what's going on in the curriculum and be something that students can then apply to what's like around them out in the world. And they had a lot of different perspectives in terms of immigration, but I really liked that way that they could take an experience somewhere else and then really start to figure out what it meant for them in the very conflict that they and we are living in. So finally, my last point about what successful engaged learning should do, it should motivate participants in it to act, to do something. The key thing that we try to do is be sure not to suggest to students that their action is some kind of charity or some kind of giving, because that sets up a sort of power dynamic that we are always trying to avoid. We're really trying to emphasize actions that they do should be in collaboration. As our students gain experience with civility, empathy, and authenticity, and other peace-building skills, we challenge them to figure out how they want to engage constructively, given the current conflicts that are demanding our attention. Will any given student end up being an analyst, standing back, looking and trying to make sense of conflict? Will they be a practitioner, wielding those skills, setting up dialogues? Will they be an advocate working within an organization to put out a set of ideas in a way that, reflects civility and empathy? Will they be an activist on the front lines, really taking up an issue? Some students have told us that they cannot be a neutral peace builder on some topics. We've heard that about mountaintop mining. We've heard that about immigration. They feel better placed as activists for those particular topics. My contention is that they need to know the differences among these, that there are real differences, and then they need to feel empowered to make choices for themselves, depending on what conflict they are moved to be a part of or to address. I am most interested in seeing them be engaged community members. That, to me, is a more important role than any kind of professional they may choose to be. Let me move to my conclusion. As remote and online learning increase, what is the fate of engaged learning, that kind of direct engagement? Some people argue that virtual reality can be a less expensive way to have engaged learning. You can put on your VR goggles and head off to Malta and maybe even talk with some of the people who our students encountered. And maybe that would be instructive in some ways. I mean, you'd miss Malta's terrific food and the great climate. So I'd certainly argue for going. But, for sure, engaged learning is possible online, but in some ways it also falls short. And that leads me really to argue for a continued commitment to a face-to-face engaged learning and other kinds of high-touch educational experiences. It's also incredibly important to continue research on education, on what works, and that's something that the Department of Education has always supported, and I hope they still can. Findings from the Pew Research Center tell us that starting in about 2016, beliefs about the value of higher education took a partisan split in the United States. Increasingly, self-identified Republicans began to have unfavorable views of higher ed, while self-identified Democrats generally kind of held steady in their support. And there's a number of reasons for this, and we could have a really interesting conversation about that. It's complicated, but the result we are seeing is that higher ed is portrayed pretty negatively right now. Actions taken recently at the federal level are making it difficult for institutions of higher learning to operate independently. Funding cuts to institutions of all types are hobbling some. Most have no safety net and no say in the matter. And we've seen institutions being sued, fined, audited. My own George Mason is on a list. We don't know exactly what that's going to mean. Audited financially and for the content of what they teach and stand for. So obviously this situation is upsetting to me, and I personally value the independence of universities and academic freedom for faculty. The value I place on education is enormous with respect to students and what they can gain through learning. And I want to just use the words of, let me just say, when I accepted this invitation back in December, I didn't imagine that I would need to speak in defense of higher education so strongly. But I want to do so using the words of someone who believes that her whole life was shaped by her ability to gain an education, including degrees in the United Kingdom and the United States. And this is Dr. Fiona Hill. She became famous through her appearance at the impeachment hearing related to Donald Trump's phone call with the president of Ukraine in July 2019. She's a Russia expert. She served on the National Security Council and was a deputy assistant to the president. And she testified based on her experience in the first Trump administration. Her subsequent book, her memoir, There Is Nothing for You Here, Finding Opportunity in the 21st Century, emphasizes the role education played in transporting her from an extremely poor town in northern England to the halls of the White House in the US. The first part of the book's title, "There is Nothing for You Here," quotes her father, who urged her to leave their town and seek opportunity elsewhere. Summing up her experience, she writes, "Educational in all its forms, from elementary to secondary to further education and professional training, is the beating heart of the infrastructure of opportunity. It has the potential to define and redefine who you are and who you will be. For me, it was everything." Much of her education was supported by public and private funds. Her words resonate with me, and I'm grateful that I've had my educational experiences and my teaching career during an almost golden age time of educational advancement and at institutions that expanded opportunities to a wide range of people in equitable and inclusive ways. I continue to believe in the power of higher ed and will argue for engaged learning and other forms of high-touch education as phenomenal experiences for learners of all ages, as terrific vehicles for connecting students with community members around them, and providing everyone the skills, experience, and motivation that just might bring more of us into civil conversation about the challenges we face. Thank you all very much for listening to me tonight.
Thank you, Susan. Does anyone have any questions in the audience for Susan?
I'm sorry I ran so long.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah.
Your term higher education, I think, would be better served as continuing education. It's not just going to college. It could be trade school. It could be pretty much anything that would help you continue to become a more educated and a member of your community.
Great point. I think, I speak mostly from my own experience of what I know, and I know it's, the kind of classic institutions of higher ed, but totally with you that there are many, many ways to continue one's education.
Negativity that you've seen, you were mentioning the way people think of higher ed, that,
I think that is true.
I mean, it's those institutions that recently have.
Republicans versus the Democrats, they always think we're looked down, or Democrats look down on them, and they think that Democrats are elitist because we have this education that maybe they don't have.
Yeah, as I said, I think there's a lot of reasons for why this split has happened, including some intentional pushing of those ideas. Could be a really interesting conversation that we could have about why we're seeing that.
Mary, did you have a question?
Well, regarding this approach to vocational education, just like here in Jefferson County, I'm a newbie to all this, but do high school students in the VOTEC school here approach learning like this, or is it more hands-on, actually learning the tools, the trade?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's learning by doing in many, many different kinds of educational institutions, absolutely. And I think technical schools would be very focused on forms of learning by doing. And again, looking at what causes success, how to do it better, I think is important in any kind of institution. I would think that this is a tension, I think, in lower schools in terms of teaching to tests as compared with using a variety of different kinds of methods. I'm not an expert in those areas, but I think that certainly experiential learning has been around and available at lower levels for a very long time, and yet is often in tension with some of the expectations of our lower schools. Please.
Empathy was a word that popped up often in your talk,
Yeah.
and I was grateful to see that. My concern is we're seeing less and less empathy amongst everybody, not just government officials, things like that. How is there a way forward to get back to that social inclusion, that social empathy? Do you see a path to teach that, even at the level here?
Yeah, I think that it is. It is something that we've seen an erosion, and some of it was, things were still working out about what the distancing of COVID produced, and I think we really don't know what that kind of social isolation has done. I do know that what can help build it is really, sharing stories and having the opportunity to really hear the experiences of another person. When you're in proximity with them, it often works better than when you're like looking at a TikTok. But that can be a start, because you can, become curious through things that you see online, and then seek out more face-to-face, more humanizing ways of approaching it. There's some debates over whether empathy can be taught. And I think that it's something that you really have to be intentional about, that it won't just happen, but that there have to be the right follow-up questions or prompts with students to be sure that they're taking it in a way that allows for empathy as that connection, that I can see what you're experiencing, I can imagine feeling that too.
So it almost needs to be more modeled and taught.
Yeah, that could be, yeah. Yeah, and I do think scenarios where people are, understanding, and where people are confronted with interactions that show empathy can also be really important. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. Sure, I'm not sure where she's heading.
So I was a high school counselor for many years,
Okay.
and I guess listening to you, I was just thinking how much value there would be in programs like that in high schools, particularly large high schools. Jefferson and Washington High School here in this county have very diverse populations. However, I spent most of my career in Maryland, and as you said, who knows where the Department of Education is going to go. But at least in Maryland, teachers are so confined by the very rigid requirements of success that there is no time. English teachers can no longer choose a book that they feel would initiate discussion, because you have to teach book A. And somehow I don't think that's going to get any better currently than it has in the past. And it's sad, because those programs are they're what every kid needs to be able to talk to somebody who doesn't believe the same thing you do.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of, just a quick comment, like I'm totally with you on that. Disappointed kind of twice. Early in my career at George Mason, we were supporting peer mediation programs in all of Fairfax County where students themselves have training in mediation and then resolve conflicts that come up between them. It was fabulous and really great for our students to go in and do training with them. And then they just couldn't sustain it within the school day. And then the second thing that's happened is with restorative justice. This is an incredible way of allowing students to create a restorative school where, again, problems are handled through restorative justice. But in restorative schools, a lot of times problems don't happen as much because students are committed to one another and have outlets for talking to one another. We couldn't get it off the ground in Arlington County, not because there wasn't a lot of desire, but as you're saying, the school day is already so overpacked. There's so many expectations. So again, it's not an area that I have worked in a lot, but I think it's so ripe for thinking about how this could be accommodated. Yeah.
Oh, yep. Come in.
Around. Hi, I really liked your presentation, and I know a little bit about Job Corps and was interested in, especially the Job Corps that's local, what the conflict issues were, and whether the students in Job Corps learned conflict management skills as well.
Yeah. I mean, the students had, some things that were between them, but really they wanted to have a little more of a say in all of the rules that they had to follow when they were in the facility. And it was a secure facility. They didn't understand some of the rules, and they just thought they could have some input to kind of work within the structure. They knew they had to be in a structure, but and our kind of diagnosis of it was it would probably help everybody out if the students could have some say in making the rules. So we worked with them in terms of like finding their voice, expressing themselves, like thinking about how to talk to some of the staff members to get these points across. We were not successful in having a conflict skills workshop with the staff. We wanted to do that, but that was like there was just a lot of pushback. I've never worked in the local Job Corps, but I worked at a particular moment in the Job Corps in Charleston. But I thought it was, again, a kind of context that would be really great to have these kinds of skills and approaches. Yeah, and we did have success with the students. We thought that they were appreciative, and we checked back with them afterwards, and they felt they had been able to use some of those skills.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yes, one last question, John.
Quick question before my husband talks. Why Malta?
Random, a little bit random. I had a colleague with connections there, and so you're opening the door for me to do the commercial break I'm supposed to do. We run a program that is a dual master's degree with the University of Malta and George Mason University, where you can get 2 masters in 1 year for the price of one. And it's a wonderful experience. Different from what I talked about, but a wonderful experience. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, John. Sorry.
This isn't the question, but I will have a question. Isn't Malta the George Cross Island? Is that?
Yes, it is. Yeah, the Cross of St. George. Yeah. For their bravery in World War II. Yeah.
Just thinking about the fact that it's close to North Africa and you're getting the migrants from North Africa coming into a small island with 500,000 people. Well, is there conflict there between the migrants and the population?
Well, I mean, not like open, violent conflict or anything like that, but there has been, not always reception, for a welcoming reception and suspicion. Like in many places where different populations interact, there can be racism, and but this has now been a couple of decades of migrant populations coming, and so they're really at a different moment of trying to figure out how to live as a diverse island that's become religiously more diverse, ethnically more diverse, racially and linguistically. So there is conflict in that's not always so easy, but it's not a space of violent conflict. And a lot of people who come from North Africa don't in fact want to stay on a tiny island at the bottom of Europe, but want to go places where there's more opportunity. So they tend to move on after they've resolved their status as a refugee or a migrant. But thanks for the question.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for coming. I hope you'll join us for a reception afterwards.
Thank you. I took off my watch and put it down, and I thought, well, this is not good. I can't see the watch. I don't know why it was like glaring back.
My question is,